We're in Texas, where Orlando Coleman, who is accused of serial bigamy in Houston, has been sentenced to 3 years in prison for marrying at least 10 women under false pretenses. Posing as a pastor or bishop, Coleman targeted small Black churches across the country, proposing marriage to women to support his claim of being a member of the clergy. Once married, he would move in with the woman, leaving them to pay his expenses. Coleman's scheme unraveled when two of his wives discovered they were both married to him and contacted authorities. Despite being sentenced to probation initially, Coleman continued his fraudulent behavior, prompting prosecutors to revoke his probation and impose a 3-year prison term. This case actually sheds light on challenges faced by minority women in finding suitable partners for marriage, particularly within faith communities where cultural norms may need to shift to identify and address disparities. The story is from the Christian Post by Leonardo Blair on March 22nd, 2024. Jonathan, I'm coming to you. What's your reaction when you actually read the story about Orlando Coleman and his acts to conviction?
Ah, meow meow. Um, this guy is in the running for Dirtbag of the Week. Um, he is definitely in the running. 10 plus, yeah, but only convicted of three in Texas, where it is a felony. 3 years is not enough, but perhaps, but other states have not done that much yet. And I don't know what's in the works for him there. They may be having get evidence type of problems because it's cross border stuff. But at least he got this much. And I said many more may be waiting in Delaware, Kentucky, Nebraska, Pennsylvania, Iowa, North Carolina, Virginia, and possibly more states. So he's definitely going to be, he was moving around a lot, but he's going to be moving back there for trial, I think, on several of those states. I have no problem with people being polyamorous, but maybe make sure that is what is going on is consensual,
Mm.
not just a scam to live on for free on another's dime. That would be good. That's called Christian morality, I guess, or Christian values. Maybe just straight values, straight being a good guy and not a dick. So that's pretty much all I have to say on it. There is something about about the female reaction to that sort of thing, but it's not my place to say anything about it. So,
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. Eli, you actually spoke on a study that the article mentioned that was posted, I want to say in 2019, that
yeah.
speaks on minority women, especially Black women, facing challenges when finding suitable partners. Can you expand on some of the findings that the study actually talked about?
Yes, Cynthia, I'd love to share my perspective on the difficulties Black women face in the marriage market with you. That seems appropriate. No, so the article mentioned a study in 2019 called "Mismatches in the Marriage Market." I read from the abstract under methods that this study identifies recent marriages from the 2008 to 2012 and a 2013 to 2017 cumulative 5-year files of the American Community Survey. Data imputation methods provide estimates of the sociodemographic characteristics of unmarried women's potential or synthetic spouses who resemble the husbands of otherwise comparable married women. What this is essentially saying is they compared the socioeconomic, sociodemographic characteristics of men who have been married to women for 5 years or more, and they said, okay, this seems to be, or men who are getting married, and said, okay, this seems to be what women desire when marrying men. So this is how unmarried men compare to these men who are married. And it found that men who are married are typically have 58% higher income. They're 30% more likely to be employed and 19% more likely to have a college degree. So I believe the study is assuming a tendency to marry within one's own race or ethnic group, because that's where it starts to specify that Black women specifically are having difficulty finding men who have the same socio-demographic characteristics as other men of similar standing who are already married. So that's sort of where that article is going.
Yeah, this is definitely a topic that has been even brought up specifically about Black women and their less likelihood to get married. A lot of times it has to do with some of even, I would say, historical implications as well. I remember there was a book that I owned that I'm still kind of working my way through that was called Black Women and Black Love and America's War on the African American Marriage. It was written by a lady named Diane Stewart, who actually talked about an analysis of social history examining the complex lineage of Americans' oppression and also Black companionship. And it seems like that this guy, this Orlando Coleman person, kind of just took advantage of that, knowing that of course we have a lot of Black women who happen to be in church in America, and especially he preyed on women who were older. And census also talks about the less likelihood for Black women who may be in their 30s and 40s to be married, right? Or either they're divorced or or never been married at all. And if they're in church constantly hearing about Jesus wants you married for some reason because God loves marriage or whatever crap that they say nowadays, then this is something that they're constantly hearing over and over again. So he just comes around and just says, I'm a bishop. I am the marrying kind. Therefore, you should marry me. And she's like, oh, Jesus answered my prayers. And so now we're here. But I'm coming to you, Helen. I saw like in your notes that you had some interesting comparisons between Mormonism trying to get away with polygamy and also expanding on the comparisons between Coleman's actions. Can you talk a bit more about, what your thoughts were concerning that?
Yeah, so when I read this, I was like, wow, wowie, wow, wow, wow. And when I first read the title, I was like, oh, I'm like, he's a bigamist, and which usually happens in the Mormon church. And I was like, oh, I'm like, my bias kicked in, and I was like, oh, he was probably married to a bunch of women, and the state found out, and they were like, can't do that, man. But no, this is so much worse. This guy's a royal piece of shit. Because I definitely have problems with bigamy, but there's something especially insidious about this guy, because he started this con, they think, back in 2001, and he traveled to states including Delaware, Texas, Kentucky, Nebraska, Pennsylvania, Iowa, North Carolina, Virginia, and others to find victims. And over that time, he was able to seek out single women that were looking for a godly man to marry, con them, marry them, move in with them, and he stopped being affectionate. He one woman complained that he stopped having sex with her. He didn't want to bond with her anymore. And then he would once he gathered enough resources, he would up and leave and just move on to another state and do it again, and wouldn't communicate anymore with these women. And it's really disgusting because he's posing as a pastor. And I find that, again, insidious. Yes, I think religion is stupid. But I understand that people have very strong faiths and they want to marry people that hold the same values as they do. And for this, mofo to sweep in and use that against these women is particularly disgusting. So I definitely have more to say about this, but I'm going to just shut up for now. So,
well, I think that that's a perfect segue to really talk about like the pervasiveness of Orlando, and also talk about this whole um, perception that these women had because he was a Christian, and he also posed that he was a pastor or a bishop or whatever. And Jonathan, you even talked about how his proposals, when he came to these women, and also how they made him look pious as a Christian. Can you talk a bit more about that, and on his letter asking for leniency?
Yeah, sure. One of the things that struck me is that a proposal was actually enough to set the suspicions of the potential wives um, to rest. In other words, he wouldn't marry me if he didn't care about me and love me, right? So they tended to see him as pious and Christian because he's trying to allay their fears about getting involved with somebody by proposing to them almost immediately. Um, he also used fake educational claims, even putting degrees in his letter to the judge asking for leniency. Um, he claimed to have a PhD, a THD, and a DD. Now that's Doctor of Philosophy. We all know PhD is. Doctor of Theology, and Doctor of Divinity. So he was convincing them that he was a super Christian and knew all about the Bible and all about religion, and could keep her, safe from the demons in the world, I guess. So the stolen creds, were just part of his con. And luckily, when he continued to do this, and when they looked into what kind of education he had, they couldn't find any. So just another part of his con. Stolen creds, not a good man. I just say good riddance, happy convictions, and many happy returns. So
It's kind of like that old adage that P.T. Barnum said, there's a sucker born every minute. And that's
yeah.
unfortunate, because it seems like that Orlando was pretty quick when he was getting these women on the hook to get him to marry him, and get them to marry them, rather. And then, no, I did not say that right. To get them to marry him. There you go. Hooked on phonics work for me. And also, the article even spoke about how one of his victims said that they were married within a month. Can you imagine? Now, I've heard people, say that, oh, I met my soulmate and we didn't want to wait. And so we got married right away, and yay. And I mean, like, I guess if it works for you, okay. But me personally, I don't necessarily think that that's long enough to actually get a chance to know somebody, especially if you're talking about marriage in the Christian sense, that you're marrying for life. This is something that you're supposed to be doing till death do you part, etc., etc., etc. But I kind of want to go back to, something I brought up before, and I really want to get your guys' thoughts on it. So can we really talk about how the church plays a role in stories like this, especially how marriage is portrayed and how the women's role is supposed to be in a marriage? I would really love to hear you guys' thoughts, since we all basically came from some type of Christian background. Helen, why don't you start, and then Eli, and then Jonathan?
So I do want to say that though being part of the church and marriage is very, very important, I don't want people to think because these women were religious that they were more susceptible to being conned, because there have been plenty of secular women or women, that aren't, in these sort of dynamics where they've been conned and taken advantage of. So this is just human behavior stuff. And some people are very good of psychologically, emotionally manipulating people. And I would imagine that, like for a lot of women, especially in the church where marriage is very much pushed, if you want to have any sort of sexual relationship, have a close emotional relationship, you have to be married. And, there's also this idea that, that's pushed within just, and the, existence of sexism, where if you're getting a little long in the tooth, you're losing your looks, that, you're not going to get a man, and, you got to jump on that horse when he shows up. But, it's not going to always work out. And it's really disgusting, because if that narrative is being pushed, and then you're not learning proper ways to understand, like, is this person good for you? You don't live together. You're not trying to discover if you're actually compatible, but there's this pressure in the, that you've been indoctrinated into: get married, get married, get married. You're getting old, get married, get married, get married, pop out some kids, get married, get married, get married. I'm not surprised these women got married in a month. It might seem shocking, but we've heard stories over and over again of, religious people, especially in, these type of religious groups, that push it very strongly. And then if you don't, then, like, well, why are you dating them if you're not going to get married? And I think that message did play a part. And the fact that he posed as a pastor, just added that, seal of approval, for him to be good marrying material.
Yeah, exactly. Eli, what are your thoughts?
Almost did it. So I keep thinking of this picture that I saw a long time ago, and it has to do with, like, the hierarchy of biblical marriage. And it basically says, like, it's like a 3 umbrellas sort of thing that are, like, in line with each other. And the top one is God, and the middle one is husband, and the bottom one is wife. And the Christian, or, like, at least that specific depiction of marriage depicts it as, like, women are subservient to their husbands. Like, you exist in a marriage to serve your husband, and it is his job to serve God. So you do whatever he says, because he's doing whatever God says. So for a woman, especially a woman who is in a demographic who is statistically likely to have difficulty finding someone to marry, if she sees someone, and if this is her idea of marriage, that, like, my job as a wife is to serve my husband, and my husband and to assist him in serving the Lord. So I can marry a pastor who has 3 degrees in serving the Lord. That's, my job is done. My job is made. I want to marry that guy, because he's going to lead me to not only a happy marriage through Christ, but to eternal life through Christ. And he just used it to his advantage. The article kept saying that he would, propose marriage to solidify his ruse as a pastor. And I don't really understand, like, how, like, okay, proposing marriage makes him a pastor. Like, I didn't get the connection there. And it could have been something like John said, where, like, they're saying, like, okay, well, if he's, willing to marry me, he must be godly. If he does care for me this much, he must be godly. If he wants to marry me already. So maybe that's how it was going. It just didn't land for me. But I think that it just, like I said, it reminds me of that diagram. And I just think that's what he took advantage of.
Yeah, that goes back to that whole a Bible verse about wives, be obedient to your husband as it is fit in the Lord, and husbands serve, the Lord, and as, what does it say? Like, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. So, some people, I've heard the whole thing about that servitude, or that, submission. Yeah, wives, be submissive to your husbands as is fit in the Lord, goes both ways. But, even though, like, I would hear this whole thing about love versus submission, the Bible specifically used those words, right? Love your wives, which, depending on the person, could be very different on how they interpret that. And then submit basically means to lower yourself and serve this person who has been placed above you. Jonathan, what say you?
It sounds very medieval, but also, that's where a lot of these rules were kind of extracted from their holy missives and the lives of various saints. But even some female saints, you have to be submissive to the men, and they're going to bring home the bacon, and the whole mythos that even in the United States early on we had that for the first 200 or so years of our country. And so this is a Western cultural thing based on the Christian church that we really need to get rid of. I mean, and I'm not speaking as a gay man. And yes, I did kind of marry my guy fairly quickly, pretty much after the first date. We started living together immediately, and we haven't been apart for about more than 2 weeks for 25 years. So, but you can find the right person. But it didn't mean that we couldn't split up any time along there as we learn more about each other. But so as far as I'm concerned, as long as there's a mutual consent, fine. But if some person's doing it deceptively, then I think that, I'm not sure I agree with bigamy laws necessarily. There's a whole lot to unpack there. But I think that in this case, justice was served because this guy was just an obvious con man. I think con men deserve to be in jail. And what's worse is I think better con men should be wardens. So anyway.
That part right there, right? Well, I think that the problem with this story is that there's a difference between being, as you mentioned earlier, polyamory versus what this guy did. He was predatory. He preyed on these women. He used these women and then left them for the next victim. This is what happened here. There was no consent, in my opinion, because he was not honest with who he was, let alone his intentions. And he left these women with the bag high and dry. And I think that this case actually serves as a stark reminder of toxic masculinity and patriarchal structures that continue to plague our society. And it's high time that we dismantle these barriers and work towards a more equitable and just world for all. And let's just keep the conversation going to strive for a future where no one falls victim to deceitful predators like Coleman. But what we would also like you to do in keeping the conversation going is watch more Nonprofits content by clicking here.